Do you feel like you've been wandering in circles, making the same mistakes, facing the same battles, and struggling with the same limitations year after year? Today marks the end of your wilderness season and the beginning of your promised land experience. What you're about to receive isn't just another prayer, it's a divine breakthrough that will shatter every cycle of defeat and launch you into a new dimension of victory, purpose, and supernatural favor. The patterns that have held you captive are being broken right now, and the destiny that God has prepared for you is being released. Right now, as these words penetrate the deepest places of your heart, the same God who brought the Israelites out of Egypt and into the promised land is bringing you out of your wilderness and into your inheritance. You are not destined to wander forever, you are not meant to live in circles of frustration, and you are definitely not called to settle for less than God's best. This is your moment of transition, your season of breakthrough, your time to cross over into everything God has promised you. Consider the incredible journey of Caleb, one of the 12 spies sent to explore the promised land. While 10 spies came back with reports of giants and impossibilities, Caleb and Joshua returned with a different spirit and a different report. Caleb declared with unwavering faith, "Let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it." Even when the people wanted to stone him for his optimism, Caleb refused to be intimidated by the majority opinion or discouraged by the size of the obstacles. His faith was anchored not in what he saw with his eyes, but in what God had promised with his word. Share, we are well able, if you're choosing faith over fear and God's promises over present circumstances. Because of his wholehearted devotion to the Lord, Caleb was promised that he would enter the land and his descendants would possess it. While an entire generation perished in the wilderness because of unbelief, Caleb maintained his faith for 45 years. At 85 years old, when it was time to claim his inheritance, Caleb's declaration was remarkable: "I am as strong this day as on the day that Moses sent me, just as my strength was then, so now is my strength for war, both for going out and for coming in. Now therefore, give me this mountain of which the Lord spoke in that day." His faith had not diminished with age, it had grown stronger through testing. Comment, "Give me this mountain," if you're ready to claim the promises God has spoken over your life, regardless of how long you've been waiting. Think about Ruth, the Moabite woman who chose loyalty over convenience and faith over familiarity. When her husband died and her mother-in-law Naomi decided to return to Bethlehem, Ruth made a decision that would change the course of history. Instead of returning to her own people and her own gods, Ruth declared with passionate commitment, "Entreat me not to leave you, or to turn back from following after you, for wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge, your people shall be my people, and your God, my God." Her choice to follow Naomi into an uncertain future positioned her for a divine encounter that would make her an ancestor of King David and ultimately Jesus Christ. Share, your God is my God, if you're choosing to follow the Lord even when the path ahead seems uncertain. Ruth's faithfulness in the small things prepared her for God's big blessings. When she went to glean in the fields to provide for herself and Naomi, she happened to come to the field belonging to Boaz, a wealthy relative who could serve as their kinsman redeemer. Boaz noticed Ruth's character, her devotion to Naomi, and her reputation for virtue. He instructed his workers to leave extra grain for her and ensured her protection. What seemed like coincidence was actually divine orchestration. God was positioning Ruth for a love story that would become a picture of redemption for all humanity. Comment, God orchestrates divine encounters, if you believe He's arranging circumstances for your breakthrough. Consider Esther, whose Hebrew name was Hadassah, meaning myrtle tree. She was an orphan Jewish girl living in exile, yet God elevated her to become queen of the most powerful empire on earth. When King Ahasuerus sought a new queen, Esther found favor in his sight above all the other women. But her elevation wasn't just for personal blessing, it was for such a time as this. When Haman's evil plot threatened to destroy all the Jewish people, Esther's position gave her access to the king and the power to intercede for her people. Her courage to approach the king uninvited, risking her own life, saved an entire nation from genocide. Share, positioned for such a time as this, if you understand that God has strategically placed you where you are for His purposes. Esther's story reveals that sometimes our greatest trials become the platform for our greatest triumphs. The very crisis that threatened to destroy her people became the opportunity for their deliverance and elevation. Haman, who had built gallows to hang Mordecai, was hanged on those same gallows. The Jews were not only saved from destruction but were given authority to defend themselves and defeat their enemies. What the enemy meant for evil, God turned for good, and what seemed like certain doom became a celebration of victory that is still remembered today in the Feast of Purim. Comment: God turns crisis into victory, if you've seen Him transform your greatest challenges into your greatest testimonies. Think about Hannah, who was barren and deeply distressed because she had no children. Year after year, she went to the house of the Lord and wept bitterly, pouring out her heart before God. Her rival Peninnah provoked her severely, making her miserable because of her barrenness. But instead of becoming bitter or giving up, Hannah turned her pain into prayer and her sorrow into supplication. She made a vow to the Lord, saying, "O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant and remember me, and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a male child, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life." Her desperate prayer moved heaven and touched the heart of God. Share: my pain becomes my prayer, if you're turning your deepest hurts into your most powerful intercession. God heard Hannah's prayer and remembered her. She conceived and bore a son, whom she named Samuel, saying, "Because I have asked for him from the Lord." True to her vow, when Samuel was weaned, Hannah brought him to the house of the Lord and gave him to Eli the priest to serve God all his life. Her sacrifice of giving up her long-awaited son positioned Samuel to become one of the greatest prophets in Israel's history. Hannah's song of praise after dedicating Samuel reveals her transformed perspective: "My heart rejoices in the Lord, my horn is exalted in the Lord. I smile at my enemies, because I rejoice in your salvation." Her willingness to surrender her blessing back to God multiplied it beyond her imagination. Comment: surrender multiplies my blessing, if you're willing to give back to God what He has given to you. Consider Rahab, the Canaanite prostitute whose life was forever changed by an act of faith. When the Israelite spies came to Jericho to scout the city before its destruction, Rahab hid them on her roof and helped them escape. Her declaration of faith was remarkable for someone who had never been part of God's covenant people. "I know that the Lord has given you the land, for the terror of you has fallen on us, and all the inhabitants of the land are faint-hearted because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and on earth beneath." When Jericho's walls fell, Rahab and her family were the only ones spared because of her faith and courage. Share: faith saves my whole family, if you believe your relationship with God can bring salvation to your entire household. Rahab's transformation didn't end with her rescue from Jericho's destruction. She married Salmon, an Israelite, and became part of the lineage of King David and ultimately Jesus Christ. A Canaanite prostitute became an ancestor of the Messiah. Her name is listed in the Hall of Faith in Hebrews 11, and she's remembered not for her past profession but for her courageous faith. God doesn't just save us from our past, He redeems it and uses it for His glory. Her story proves that no one is too far gone, no background is too broken, and no past is too shameful for God to transform into something beautiful. Comment: God redeems my past for His glory, if you need Him to transform your history into His story. Think about Gideon, who was threshing wheat in a winepress, hiding from the Midianites who had oppressed Israel for 7 years. When the angel of the Lord appeared to him, the greeting was startling: "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Gideon looked around, perhaps wondering if the angel was speaking to someone else. Mighty warrior? He was the least in his family, from the weakest clan in Manasseh. But God saw not what Gideon was, but what he could become through divine empowerment. When God called him to deliver Israel, Gideon asked for signs, and God patiently provided them. The fleece that was wet while the ground was dry, and then dry while the ground was wet, confirmed God's calling on his life. Share: God sees my potential, if you need to be reminded of how He sees you beyond your current circumstances. God told Gideon his army of 32,000 men was too large because He wanted to make it clear that the victory would come from him alone. After testing them at the water, only 300 men remained. With trumpets, empty jars, and torches, this tiny army surrounded the vast Midianite camp. At Gideon's signal, they blew their trumpets, broke their jars, held up their torches, and shouted, "The sword of the Lord and of Gideon." The enemy was thrown into supernatural confusion and turned their swords against each other. God's strategy was unconventional, but his victory was complete and undeniable. The same God who gave Gideon victory with impossible odds is giving you victory in your impossible situation. Comment: God's strategy always works, if you're trusting his unconventional methods over conventional wisdom. Consider Deborah, the only female judge in Israel's history, who led the nation during a time of great oppression under Jabin, king of Canaan. For 20 years, the Israelites had been cruelly oppressed by Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, who had 900 chariots of iron. But Deborah heard from God and summoned Barak to lead 10,000 men against this seemingly impossible enemy. When Barak hesitated and asked Deborah to go with him, she agreed but prophesied that the honor of victory would go to a woman. The battle was won not through superior military might but through divine intervention, and Sisera was ultimately killed by Jael, who drove a tent peg through his temple while he slept. Share: God uses women mightily, if you believe he can use you regardless of what others think about your gender, age, or background.